Welcome to this edition of the NYU Game Center guest lecture series. We are here to celebrate a couple of amazing games that came out about 20 years ago and forever transformed the history of video games. And we're going to have a conversation with a couple of brilliant people that were part of the teams that made that happen. So before we begin, I would like to thank our sponsors, Arcadium, Smashworks, Fresh Planet, Avalanche, Take-Two, the studios who sponsored the lecture series and the event series for the Game Center and helped make this possible. So thanks very much to those guys. And yes, how about a round of applause for our generous sponsors? Yeah, so DOOM and MYST are among the most important video games ever made. I think that sort of goes without saying. And it's kind of remarkable looking back on it now that they came out around the same time. Seems weirdly like a weird bit of synchronicity, kind of a strange miracle. These two games, which in some ways are at opposite ends of a stylistic spectrum, right? MYST is very contemplative. It's very cerebral. It has this kind of somber quality. It's quite grown up and sophisticated in many ways. DOOM is this raucous, in-your-face, confrontational, kind of angry, heavy metal slice of pop culture, rowdy and noisy and crazy and over the top. And yet really what joins both of them is they, each in their own way, mark a point at which I think a door opened up into a new way of thinking about video games as space. As three-dimensional space, as virtual space. For me personally, and I'm old enough to have been, a fan of both games when they came out, a player of both games, and I remember in both cases having a kind of deep emotional reaction to watching, first of all, over the shoulder, watching people play DOOM and just like being drawn into this weird space, sitting down and playing MYST and with my son on my knee who had just been born, and having this again this kind of weird. There's a dreamlike quality in some ways in both games. This idea of a place that isn't real, but at the same time it isn't fiction, right? It's realer than fiction, and yet somehow so it has this kind of strange dreamlike quality. And I think that is for me personally, that's my connection. That there's this like turning point in games that's marked by both of these. So I am very excited to welcome you both and to have a conversation with you about these games and their legacy. So if you will please welcome me in joining, join me in welcoming, rather, getting verklempt up here. Join me in welcoming Rand Miller and John Romero. So put your hands together, please. And I'm gonna sit down. Welcome me and joining.
Thanks, everybody.
And I will. Yes, actually, I am going to join you. I'm going to try to figure out the things that join you guys together.
1993.
Yeah. So, first of all, I'm going to ask both of you just briefly to kind of paint a picture for us of what life was like when you were working on MYST, when you were working on DOOM. Maybe we'll start with you, Rand. Like, paint the picture of what the Cyan studio was like. How many people were there? What was the day-to-day like? What was the vibe in the studio? Just like put us there for a minute, if you would.
The Cyan studio was. Can you hear me? Yeah, there we go. Cyan studio was our houses. I mean, it was the cheapest way to do what we needed to do. So we literally just all set aside places in our homes where we had our computers, and there was no good, fast way to transfer information. This was old. I feel like I'm the Harrison Ford of this. You know, you get like he's old enough where he kind of gets there and he seems like he's like, whoa, and I kind of feel like I'm that, like, whoa, where has this? What happened? Like Anyway, yeah, we couldn't transfer stuff on the internet. We had modems, and every now and then we could do small files, but we had somebody we paid to drive big files around, and we, for miles. It was, those magneto-optical discs. Remember those? So yeah, that was how we had to transfer information. And it felt indie and heady, and like we were working on really cool stuff that we had no idea if anybody would like. But it was a very special time. Yeah.
How many people were involved at that point?
It was we started with basically 4. We started production with 4 people, and Robin.
So there was you and your brother,
yeah,
Robin.
Myself and Robin was my brother. He did the artwork, kind of headed that up, and then Chuck Carter did artwork with him. He was a local artist, and they kind of did all the ages, and I did the tying everything together, the programming, if you could call it that. It was just too easy to call programming at that point. But it was simple, and put all the sounds in, and then another guy, Chris Brandkamp, did sounds and counting.
Okay. And where was this geographically? Where were you
in
guys?
Spokane, Washington.
Spokane, Washington. Okay.
Yeah, middle of nowhere.
All right. And now, okay, so John, now you paint the picture of what id was like back in the day. What was a day-to-day life like for you guys when you're working on Doom?
Let's see. With Doom, we had just moved into an office space where we had been in apartments before that. For, I think, 2 years before that, we were just in apartments making Doom. Doom was my 89th game that I had made. But we'd done...
Wait, well, hold on. Seriously? I'm like sitting there thinking, wait.
89th, yeah. It was game number 89.
By the time you got to Doom.
By the time I got to Doom. We just hired, before we started on Doom, we just hired 2 other people, Kevin Cloud and Jay Wilbur, to be another artist and CEO, and that made the company 6 people at that time. So when we started Doom, we started thinking about it in December of '92. In November of '92, we just moved into an office space, which was called the Black Cube, and it was in Mesquite, Texas. And so we started to think about Doom in December of '92, and then in January of '93 is when we actually started working on the game. And we knew what we were going to make. And out of all the games that we had made together as a team, or even really any of us individually, this was the only game where we basically said, we need to make the best game that anyone has ever thought about even playing. Where before the other games were just like, let's do something cool. Oh, let's make this, and we just worked on it. But with Doom, it was like, we're gonna have to knock it out of the park with this game. It has to be the best thing in the world.
Okay.
And so we put a press release out in January that basically said that.
Okay.
And then we started working on it.
Interesting.
And even with Quake afterwards, we didn't say this is gonna be the best game in the world or anything. It was only Doom that we said that, and we went after it. Yeah. But during that year, it took 1 year to make the game, and we had 6 people working on it, and we hired some other people to start working on tech support now, because this is going to be a complex engine, and we don't know what's going to come out at the end other than what we said was going to come out, but technically we didn't know what it was going to take to accomplish it. But during that year, after the first 2 months of game development, we already had our engine up and running. And so it was easier for us to visualize and start making the levels. And the other thing that's really important that I didn't even mention is that this was the first time that we'd made a game for DOS but using Next Step, which was what OS X is today is what Next Step was back then. Okay. And so we were using Next Step to develop, kind of cross-develop down to DOS machines. And we had a Novell 311 server that was like the file server in between the 2 machines, so they both could save data to a file system. And then on DOS we had the drivers to connect to that server, load the executable, because we even compiled the executable on Next Step. It would actually, it's a 68,000 processor, but it would compile to x86 to an exe file, and then we just copy the exe file over on the DOS machine and just run the game, and it connects to a DOS extender, and there it goes. So we were doing cross development starting with Doom all the way through Quake, which included Heretic and Hexen.
So you set out when you were working on Doom. You set out to. It was intentional. You're like, okay, now it's time for a quantum leap. What made you think that? Like, why now? Why was Doom the moment? that you said, okay, now the pieces are in place and we can make this big swing for the fences?
Because when we were working on Wolfenstein, that was a pretty basic engine. It was really simple. It used ray casting for the technology, and during the year of Wolfenstein, which is kind of '92. We had modified the Wolfenstein engine for a game called Shadowcaster that was published by EA and developed by our friends Raven, and it was like Wolfenstein Plus. So it had sloped floors and it had lighting levels and different heights. And so that was us trying to evolve the Wolfenstein engine into something better that we could make something cooler than Wolfenstein with, and after kind of pushing the engine to its limits with Shadowcaster, decided that this engine cannot go where we want to go. It's not going to be as cool as what we're envisioning. And so it was kind of back to the drawing board and deciding to get rid of array casting and come up with a new data structure that could let us do walls and basically line segments and sectors. Coming up with that data structure, and then during the initial phases of talking, and John Carmack's the guy who wrote the engine, so he's the one who could really visualize what was possible and tell us how this was going to work.
Yeah, he works for Facebook now, right? That's
He's working for Zuckerberg, yeah. Right. So he's brilliant guy. I guarantee you would be very lucky to work with anyone this brilliant in your whole life. He is unbelievable. Yeah. And so he basically described to me and Tom what we could do, like what the lighting levels were, the floor heights, the shapes of sectors, the kinds of things that we could do in the world. And so Tom and I are visualizing it, and we keep on pushing him for more things, and he's thinking about it, he's incorporating it into the data structures, and then finally, we come up with multiplayer, the idea to do multiplayer over IPX and modem and stuff, and so we're basically like, okay, we can make the best game in the world. Like, definitely. These are all the pieces that could be the coolest looking thing, because we're visualizing what it could look like, which actually wasn't what the game looked like. The game looked better than what we were thinking at the time. We had a lot of issues with level development. But yeah, even with the limited vision of what we were thinking about the game, we said it was going to be the best thing.
So the guys at id sort of made a conscious decision to like swing for the fences. What was it like? Was that also the case for you guys? Because you had made some similar games, right? There was Cosmic Osmo and Spelunks and the Manhole and some of the things that are in MYST were in those games, right? There was still an environment that you're exploring, but was there a sense of, okay, now we're going to make a quantum leap and kind of and reach for something more ambitious?
Yeah. I hadn't thought of it that way till you mentioned it, but it was ironically almost the same kind of thing. Although we had started with children's software, building these worlds, and it wasn't until that time period that we were approached by a Japanese company who said, "Hey, we loved your children's software. Can you do something for an older audience?" And we had come up with several ideas for things for an older audience. Knew we would go there at some point, but we said, "Yeah, we're ready. We were ready to do this. We're ready." We didn't know what game proposals were. They said, "Well, give us a proposal." We were like, "Okay, so
I will tell you.
What is that?" So we drew top-down maps of the ages of MYST with like little lines that went like, marker switch and planetarium, and and I think it was 7 pages of it was like 5 were the ages and 2 were as much text as we could, like, okay, there, 7-page, and they went, okay, and this is going to be good, and we said, oh, it's going to be incredible. This is going to be the biggest thing ever. And so in my mind, what I remember is, we didn't know what we were doing. We were kind of putting this together, but I looked at what we had, the old presentation, what we told them. It's like, we're building this for a mass market. We want everybody to play this, from young kids to old people. We really are trying to make something that would immerse anybody and everybody. And I don't know if that was just, spewing hype so we could get the money to do the thing, but it did, there's this recollection of us getting this feeling like, no, this is going to be different. We're not hand drawing this. We're using these incredible computers to render this, and it's going to look like. And I remember the feeling when we got a couple images back. We used Strata 3D, and we did. Robin did MYST Island, and put a few things on there with did the island and a couple buildings and the first dock, and it was like, okay, this is cool. I mean, click and move, and it felt. This is really cool. It felt like we were onto something. And so, yeah, I think we did have this feeling like this is a leap, not just an evolution, but this one went a little bit bigger than just the next children's program. Yeah.
And you're both working on building off of stuff that you had done earlier. Were there other influences? There's stories about you guys seeing Ultima Underworld and having a little bit of a sense of rivalry, that you were going to outdo that. Is that true? Were there other things that you were looking at that you were influenced by? Obviously in Wolfenstein wears its influences on its sleeve, but when you were starting on Doom, were there other things that you were playing and thinking about? And I'm also curious then to hear about whether you guys had influences too.
So the thing with Ultima Underworld, this is an interesting story. Ultima Underworld came out 1 week before Wolfenstein came out in 1992. And the technique that they used was called texture mapping, which back in 1990, when we were just barely beginning to form id and build the Commander Keen games, I was good friends with Paul Neurath because I worked with Paul at Origin in the 80s. And he's the guy who made Space Rogue and Deep Space and stuff, and he's the one who owned Looking Glass and was making Ultima Underworld. So I used to call him up on the phone and just talk to him. And he told me, he basically told me this one day in 1990 on the phone, he's just like, we're making a game. I'm sure you can guess what IP. I can't talk about it, which is Ultima, because he was tied to Origin kind of. And he said we're using a really cool new technique called texture mapping. It's where you take a picture and you map it onto a 3D square on the screen. And so I told John Carmack after the phone call, I said they're using this technique called texture mapping, where they're basically just blah blah blah. And Carmack just thought for a few seconds. And he's like, yeah, I could do that. And so this is in 1990, though, right?
Right.
Wolfenstein came out in 92. So I already knew about texture mapping in 1990. We already knew that people were working on this. But we already had our plans of what we were going to make. So it took a whole year from that point before we made a game called Catacomb 3D, which was the first texture mapping game, and it was an EGA. And we released that in November of '91, which is before Ultima Underworld came out, which came out in April of '92. So we actually released texture mapping before they did, but it was an EGA, so it's not so cool. But then Wolfenstein came out after that. But we weren't influenced by Ultima Underworld because we already knew what we could do and what we were going to make, and the ideas for Doom mostly came from. Well, first we've been playing D&D for a long time, and so this world that Carmack had generated, he was the DM, the Dungeon Master.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Back in the day when they were called DMs and not GMs.
Yeah. Sure.
He was the DM, and he had a world that had been running people through for years, and so it was like a giant map. It was fully developed with hundreds of NPCs that all had political intrigue, and it was really cool. We've been playing at id, playing in this world for a long time, and.
What kind of character did you?
I had several characters. 'Cause I actually died several times. But you're not gonna believe this. I actually destroyed his world.
What?
I actually destroyed the planet. John will play by his rules, right? If I do something in his world that actually will cause it to be destroyed, he'll do that. And unfortunately, the world was overrun by demons, right? Which is kind of where Doom's portal, like demons coming out of a portal. It was overrun by demons because I wanted a Daikatana. So Daikatana killed his world.
Careful what you wish for.
Which then destroyed me years later, right? But so his world was destroyed, and we stopped playing D&D basically after that. But the idea of those demons coming through the portal was still there, and we loved watching all of the 80s movies. And so we were Evil Dead fans. And we were fans of Aliens, and when we started working on Doom, very near the very beginning, Jay's our CEO, and he's always looking at what else can I do, and he got in touch with, I think it was 20th Century Fox, that basically was just like, do you guys want to do Aliens, the game? And weirdly enough, back in '88, I had my second game company had in 1988. We actually made an Alien game, an Aliens game for the PC. I don't think it was ever published, and it was actually, we're working with Infocom on that, but it never got published, so an Aliens game hadn't come out. So we thought about it for half an hour and decided we're not going to make an Aliens game because we don't want anyone to tell us what to do. Like, creative control is the thing that we care about. We're total indies. We didn't take money from any publishers. We're the ones who were making the game off of the games that we had already made, the income from those games. And so we're just like, nope, let's forget it. But we talked for half an hour. How cool would it be? We love Aliens, the movie, you know. And then we decided no. And it was great because, like, the Evil Dead shotguns and all that stuff, like the chainsaw, that was from a different IP. You know, so they would have vetoed that idea. You know, if we had done Alien, it would have been totally different. And the other thing for us was, you know, with Wolfenstein, shooting Nazis in a game was not something any other game had done other than the original Wolfenstein. So we made a game that was kind of novel in what you did. And so with Doom, if you're going into space, the typical thing you're going to run into are aliens, of course. And to me, that was just like overdone a million times. So why are we doing this? Why don't we have demons coming through portals and invading? Like, when you go into space, you see hell instead of aliens. And so I thought that was way more of an interesting approach to the design of the game. Yeah. So basically, we were influenced by Aliens, we're influenced by Evil Dead, and the D&D that
Dungeons
we
and
played.
Dragons, yeah. How about you guys? Where were some of were there influences you were working with at the time?
We came from a little bit of a different branch on the computer gaming family tree.
Okay.
But it was actually, there's some amazing similarities as you're talking. It's crazy. I played D&D too, and I was my inspiration for D&D was my brother was the dungeon master. I was like, screw this! I don't want to roll the dice and play your game. I'm going to make my own. But it wasn't a repeatable thing with lots of monsters. It was a puzzle-filled. Like, and I drew little pictures, and there was this thing, and people came, and they had to look over this fortress, and how do I get in the door? Well, you got to figure it out. And I don't think we rolled the dice at all, but they had to, it was more like a role-playing, them in my insane head figuring out the puzzles, how to get into this thing and explore the world, which is kind of cool. It's fun that inspired both directions, which is probably never thought of that before. I was inspired, I think, Robin and I both loved the early Zork games and the text adventures. Mm-hmm. I mean, we came up exploring those where you still could get eaten by a grue, but it was not a lot of blood, So that was, and then I still remember the Japanese company. By the way, they were incredible to work with. It was one of our best experiences ever, and we're still friends with them to this day. All they kept saying is, wait, are you going to sell more than Seventh Guest? Is this going to be better than Seventh Guest? And we just kept saying, yeah, I think so. What's Seventh Guest?
Nice.
And so we played it, and it was like, this is pretty good. But I think we kind of learned from them and did some things a little different. But that was where we came from.
So was there ever a moment when you were working on MYST, you're putting it together? You described that one moment where you started to see things come back and you were stitching them together and having this feeling. Did you ever have a sense that this was going to be this world-changing thing? Did you ever get a glimpse of like, wow, this might be just like a huge impact?
There were two moments, and none of them, neither of these moments had anything to do with my own biased opinion, because I get to play the world first. Robin would send me just raw images and correction images, because the switch had to be both down and up, and so I would get to actually be the first one to walk through the world, and so to me it felt amazing. I loved it, but you don't trust your own opinion. But the two times when I felt like we were onto something were when we could sit behind people playing it, and we didn't do QA. We brought two people in, we sat them down. It was two people so they could talk to each other, and we would find out what was in their head. And we say, play the game and feel free to talk to each other. And we kept yellow pads of when they clicked and nothing happened, it's like, well, we did something wrong. So we'd go in and move the button a little bit or whatever. And the responses were awesome. I mean, that's when when finally people were like, I don't want to stop. This is really cool. I'm enjoying this. That was the first time, just the individuals. The second time was the publisher, Brudabun, did a focus group. I'd never done a focus group in my life. Behind the mirror, and they serve you food. Yeah, if you've never been behind the mirror, they serve you food behind the mirror. It's like, not only can we watch you and laugh at you on the other side, but we get to eat while we do it. So, but that was so scary because they had given it to people to play for a week, and we weren't even finished with it, but they gave it to people to play for a week, and they brought them back in a week later. We sat behind the glass, and the very first person said, I don't get this. I don't get it at all. And we're like, because if the first person says that, it's like, oh, great, peer pressure. How can the next person say anything but like, well, I don't get it either. But the second person said, this was amazing. I sat in a dark room. I turned up the sound. I played this thing, and I felt like I lost myself in this world. It was like a whole different kind of feeling. And it went around the room, and it was mostly those. And so that was the second time we felt like, okay, this is cool. We got something. And they liked how it was different. It was a little bit unique, a little different than things that had come before. So that was a great feeling. Yeah.
What about you guys? Did you get a sense of like, oh, we're going to hit this out of the park?
Yeah, I mean, we knew that the game was going to be great when we started working on it, and we
right away.
Well, it was funny. We were working on, and the thing is, like when we were making levels at the very beginning, we were making levels that still kind of looked like Wolfenstein, just with lighting and with slime and stuff. But we were actually, even though we had the freedom to put lines at any angle, we were still drawing 90-degree hallways and stuff. And part of that was just, Tom wasn't really inspired to figure out like how to do like the abstract level design that I came up with. It was just like we made a lot of Doom stuff or Wolfenstein stuff, and it was like, well, this is like military installations. Of course, they're going to look like military buildings, which are square and hallway ridden and stuff. So that was what was being developed, and it wasn't good enough. It just didn't look good enough, and the team is just like, come on, we really need to come up with something better than this. I mean, the technology is really great. What's going on with the game's not looking good? And so one day I finally just said, forget it. I'm just going to come up with the level design. And I just visualized a room that ended up being an E1 M2, and I just made one room that kind of utilized everything that the engine could do. With high ceilings and darkness and light and enemies up on top and a huge elevator coming down and everything. And then even without it moving, I just brought the artists in and I said, check it out. And they came in, they're like, hell yeah, this is what I'm talking about. And I was like, we're doing it like this. And so Tom saw it and he's like, oh my God, finally, this is what I'm talking about. This is what we got to do. So then we adopted the abstract level design process, which was just like, it was about getting a sense of scale of where you're at, and don't think about trying to create real physical spaces, because that is not going to be fun. So think of things that look great and will play great and can surprise the player. And hey, it's in the future. Architecture might be different, So that's what we did. We just pushed for like what can look like a base but still not be constructed like a base and be futuristic and fun to play in. So we have to have the space for the encounters, combat encounters, and all that stuff. And so we knew that it was going to be pretty cool, like right after, especially after the abstract level design thing, and then the visualization of what multiplayer could look like with like, I'm in a room looking, I was kind of visualizing E1 M7 and looking through a window into another room where two players are like trading rockets. And I'm just like, this has never happened, but this is the greatest thing ever. Oh my God. So, and I said, this is gonna be the greatest game on the planet Earth, seriously, like, in history, And so, I was just excited about the game. But yeah, we knew.
I want to ask a little bit about the relationship between design and technology, because I think in both games there's this really important kind of design breakthrough, but it's really deeply related to technology. And in Myst, it's about these beautiful pre-rendered worlds, and it's also about the technology of the CD-ROM, which allowed people to like page through these pre-rendered assets quickly enough to create that experience. And in Doom, obviously, it was about these kind of incremental improvements over Wolfenstein 3D, but still that somehow broke through a threshold where all of a sudden, experientially, it got to be a totally different kind of experience, a presence, a kind of immersive presence. And I guess one question I would ask is, often there's kind of a story told about the tension between you and John Carmack, that sort of he represented the technology side and you kind of represented the design side, and that sometimes those things came into conflict. Is that true? Was there this kind of ongoing dynamic?
It definitely was true on Wolfenstein, because like in Wolfenstein we didn't have push walls forever. And that was the thing that drove people to really spend time exploring, was the push walls. Like, as soon as you find out that secret walls are are available, you're going to touch every wall, which means you're really going to interact with the environment more than just like what you see is what you get, right? So that was a fight to get that. With Doom, though, it wasn't much of a fight because it showed him during Wolfenstein, you put something like this in and people love it, right? Because we'll take advantage of it. So by the time he put push walls in Wolfenstein, we had to go through all the levels and put secret stuff in them through all of the stuff that we had already made. So with Doom, at the beginning of the engine, like, we kind of foresaw like what we wanted. We wanted secret rooms, we wanted monsters, we wanted passages outside and all kinds of stuff. And so all he had to do was construct the two-sided door that could open and close, and look like a secret wall or whatever. As soon as we had that, he didn't need to do anything else. It's like we could do everything with the pieces that he made, and so there wasn't the tension was mostly during Quake, but during Doom it was just smooth sailing. It was like we knew what we were doing and we were blasting as fast as we could doing it.
Nice. What about you guys? Do you have a technical background, Rand? Okay, so yeah. Tell me a
I'm
little
highly
bit.
technical.
Well, I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I'm not.
Hold the microphone. Come on.
You want me to go do some math or something?
Yeah,
up here?
throw a couple equations up. Show us the system architecture, if you would. Talk a little bit about how technology fit into the process for you guys.
It's a really an important question for anybody doing games, and it's probably the most important question. It's not a question of how far you can push it. It's a question of designing with your limitations or within your limitations, knowing those limitations, pushing just enough so that you can get things done and get things finished, and aiming at a moving target that's going to be ahead of you in a couple years. But the box that is your technical constraints is a good thing. It's a really cool, wonderful thing. And I think a lot of projects fail because they don't think of the box ahead of time. They don't think of their constraints. They think the world is their oyster and I can build whatever I want and there aren't any limitations, and they just kind of sputter out because you can't. So you know your limitations ahead of time, you design your game with those, and you end up being able to tweak it and perfect it within those limitations. I think it's a really key component in all of that. So yeah, we had design constraints that were completely different than yours because we're pre-rendering these images, but we had to know how big we wanted the images. We knew we were going on CD-ROM. We had to make sure that we could present an image. I mean, it's slideshow, but people are only going to wait so long. There was only 256 colors, so we had to. We knew that we wanted to adjust the palette because the 256 they gave you by default were hideous and made our images look bizarre. So every age had a different palette that was particularly picked for just the images in that age. I mean, little things that were completely different, but once again, it was the constraints we built it within. And interestingly, the Japanese company, which I'll mention once again, Sunsoft at the time, that was their name. They wanted this product for platforms, and so we knew that these ages had to be small enough to fit in a small memory footprint, and that evolved as we went, but it also defined the fact that we built small self-contained ages, knowing that had to be loaded one at a time, and so all of that fit into just the beginning constraints. It's a really important question. It's a good one.
I want to ask about. So there's this thing that I think joins Myst and Doom that I talked about. This sense of breaking through a threshold and creating a sense of immersive space in both games. It's really one of the most powerful things. But there's also this deep difference, and I think maybe one way to characterize it is the difference between combat and puzzles, right? So you're both playing Dungeons & Dragons, and Dungeons & Dragons kind of has both of these things. It's got problem solving, and then it also has dice rolling and combat, and it's interesting to see now that contemporary AAA video game development has almost kind of merged these two things back together, and in some ways represents a rejoining of these ingredients. Maybe you can see traces of that in Half-Life beginning to, and now I think very much so you see kind of both of these things. There's the kind of environmental storytelling that you guys did in Myst is a big part of contemporary video games and puzzles, but at the same time, combat is still there and it's still very much a presence. And I guess maybe starting with you and asking about puzzles, were the puzzles in Myst, were they there as just a structure to draw people through the world, or did you love puzzles, and were puzzles something that you were really into and you wanted to create great, interesting puzzles?
Okay, the easy question is that we had to slow people down, and everybody has to slow people down in games, and it's called friction. And that's what they were. We just knew, I think, because we were evolving our games from our earlier games, that we said, well, we're not gonna kill you, so you don't start over.
Right.
So we're gonna have to define another way to slow you down. So we'll put these puzzles in. I don't think my brother and I, either one of us, particularly, were puzzle fans, and I don't know that we actually ever thought that what we were doing was a puzzle game.
Yeah.
We just thought we were building things into the environment that would be friction that you would figure out. Of course, it was puzzles, but we were ignorant. So yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was. We
Interesting.
thought of it as an exploration game, not a puzzle game. Yeah.
Right. And yet, the experience of playing Myst really is this kind of deep engagement with these puzzles. And it's often, I've often thought about the puzzles in Myst and the combat in Doom as both being examples of designers discovering what are the affordances of 3D space. Like, what can you do that's interesting in 3D space? And in shooting games, it's not just that we are violent by nature and we want to have these cathartic experience. It's also that you're doing ray casting, or you're doing texture mapping, and then shooting is a kind of version of that same thing for the player. They're tracing 3D space and looking at moving objects and trying to find lines of sight. And in the kind of environmental problem solving of Myst is also similar. It's like, okay, well, now that I have a sense of presence, I can use that to understand where I am on this island, how these things fit together. Oh, this casts a shadow here, and this. But at the same time, there is a sense in which, I don't know if you're aware of a kind of reemergence of puzzles in contemporary indie games now as a thing that people are really interested in. So in games like English Country Tune, or the game The Witness, which Jonathan Blow is now working on, is he's, I think, deeply inspired by Myst. Right. And so it's funny to see the legacy of the puzzles that you put in there as just examples of what you were kind of discovering as necessities in how to slow people down and moving through this environment.
Well, the puzzles were interesting because from our point of view, we're just building friction, but we're trying to make them we're trying to build them into the environment. We're trying to make these things seem like they're part of what's there. The Seventh Guest was interesting because it was just puzzles, kind of, in my humble opinion, was a little bit arbitrary, but they built it into environments. We were trying to do better, and when Myst came out, everybody thought, oh, the puzzles are so integrated. I look back now, it's like, wait, there's a machine with 2 levers in a clock tower. It's like, what did that have to do with anything? It was like integrated, So I think Riven allowed us to take that even a step further, where we tried to have a history behind everything, and almost pushed too far. Riven was a work that I'm incredibly proud of, but you learn with every work you do, and building into the environment almost too much kind of hamstrings you a little bit as well. So Jonathan Blow with The Witness, I think he's looking more at, no, I'm building a puzzle game, I'm embracing that. I don't have to explain why everything here is this way, and that So, but there's so many different directions. It's all about spaces. Yeah,
and then of course combat. What ended up being the sort of core interaction of Doom, in some ways became a kind of interactive vocabulary that was then the common language for a whole genre of games. Building off of that, the turn and shoot, the look and shoot, and is that a legacy that you've ever thought about? Is there any? Have you ever had any nightmares about this kind of like deep legacy of kind of nonstop bloodshed that you kind of unleash, the demons that you let into our world?
It's all your fault, dude.
You know what I'm saying? Like, because it's obviously it's produced a lot of great games. But has that ever weighed heavy on you a little bit?
No,
No,
nope, never. I
Enough.
love playing those games. In fact, while after we had made Doom, I needed more Doom, and so I was basically got Raven to work on Heretic using our engine, because I'm like, we need more of these games. I want to play more. Yeah, more people need to use our stuff to make more games. But the combat in Doom, interestingly, this year at GDC, Matthias Schwartz had given a really great talk about design, but also mostly it's he uses Doom as his key research point. He's a really great game designer, and he basically broke Doom down big time into every like axis of what makes Doom work, and the weapon balances and the types of creatures we put in it, which for us was a real simple decision for us. We just kind of innately knew, like, well, you got to have stuff in the air, you got to have stuff on the ground, you have to have different speeds of rate of fire, you have to have hit scan weapons, you have to have projectiles, and we basically just said, here's a list of enemies, here's how they all ramp in their difficulty, and here's the kind of weapons that we're going to make that will, one of the important things about the weapons in Doom is that none of them make obsolete the weapon before it. They're all useful weapons for different reasons, and so that was a really important thing, because a lot of later games, basically, more powerful weapon, get rid of the ones before it, and for us it was like, no, everything has to be balanced correctly. We need to use all these weapons. We're spending a lot of money making this game and these weapons. We have to use all of them, so we had to basically balance it out that way. I think you should be able to see his talk online, but it's really great the way it breaks it down. But for us, it was like, here's a 3D space. It's cool to look at. The engine that we built was really unique in the history of engines. It was a game engine that made it really easy to build 3D spaces, well, 2.5D spaces. Made it already scary because the game had diminished lighting built into it. So wherever you're at, it will get darker down the hallway no matter what the sector light level is set to. So anyone that is making a level in Doom gets a scary level immediately just by making a level, right? So it's like they don't have to put that into their level. It's already there by the engine. Yeah. And so it was easy to create stuff, and it was easy to make scary, and to get the gameplay of what they play Doom, people play Doom, they know what it feels like, and then they make a level, and their level plays like the ones that they just played because the engine just makes it work that way. Yeah. So the modding was really, really popular because it wasn't like, wow, what did they do? I made a level and it's crap compared to the stuff that came with the game. It was exactly
And you guys, that was a big part of your ethos, right? Of like shipping the game in such a way that it was easy to modify, where you had the WAD files and just like everything was there. Was that a conscious decision?
Oh yeah, totally. We already had like that kind of data structure in Wolfenstein. We didn't have WADs, but we had an EGA graph file that basically had all of the graphics in it in one big thing. So we were about this is like back in the day where the cluster size of a piece of data on your hard drive would take up like 4K, and if you saved a file that had 1 byte in it, you just ate 4K. And on a limited space, like 1.44 meg discs, the 3.5 inches back then, we needed to put everything, like when it got on someone's hard drive, we needed to use the minimum amount of space and not waste space. So we didn't put a lot of files out there. Like, for example, there was a game called Ecstatica that came out in 92 or 93 that had tons of files, to where the amount of data on the hard drive was twice the amount of data that the game took up, because of all the files that they had ate up all those extra clusters. And so for us, coming from the 80s, for us it was like, we need everything in one file. There needs to be one data file that everything comes out. We executable and data. That's it. And so we were about minimizing waste. And so the WAD file format was the thing that we stuck all of our data into, and it just made it easier for everybody to modify. But the thing coming from Wolfenstein, the maps and everything in Wolfenstein were compressed. They were using a modified Huffman compression. The algorithm was different, and the dictionary was
linked in. Throw it up on the blackboard real quick?
Oh, yeah. I'll just write, because it's a modified Huffman, so it's not even
a modified Huffman.
You couldn't take it out of a book and make that algorithm work with our data, because we'd modified it because of the kind of data that we were saving. So the dictionary for the Huffman compression was linked into our executable, which was then Limpelzev compressed, which is what zip uses. So we had this double compression thing going. So it was to save space. It wasn't to keep people out of our data. But we found people, like after Wolfenstein came out, that they had cracked it. They'd figured out how to un-LZ exe, the executable, how to pull the Huffman thing out and then write an editor to modify to edit the levels and make new Wolf levels. And we're like, wow, people want to modify our games really bad. Let's not do that on the next one. Let's make it easy.
And so there was a lot of games that came out after Doom that were originally they were called Doom-alikes, right?
They're called Doom clones.
Doom clones. Did you guys see them that way? Did you have any anxiety about that? Was it like, oh yeah, these guys are biting our style, or was it?
No, we wanted more games
You were
to
just
play
like,
that.
we're happy. Okay.
We wanted to play more games like that. I mean,
Yeah.
we knew that we were already ahead of everybody. So it's not like it is today, but back then we would tell anybody how we were doing what we were doing. So like Andre Lamothe is a really, really smart guy. He wrote most of the books that everybody learned how to program Windows, like Windows tricks of the Windows programming gurus and tricks of the Windows graphics programming gurus. The 800-page giant tomes that people use for reference. Sure. Anyway, he's a super smart guy. He's also an electrical engineer, and he makes consoles and he codes. So he's unbelievably smart. He came to id in '93 while we were making Doom, asking us how we did Wolfenstein. So we basically told him the whole raycasting algorithm, and that was for his very first published book, so he could do that. And we basically told anybody who wanted to know how we were doing our stuff, how we did it. It doesn't mean that they're going to make the same game as us. It's just like, yeah, here's how we do it. Have fun trying to replicate that, but here's the information. And so we would tell anybody anything. And even when Doom came out in January of '94, we published the level specs. We basically said, here's the data structure of the levels. Nice. Here it is. We just put it out there. Here are the structs in C, and go make levels.
I want to ask both of you a little bit about money and how money was a factor in the birth of these two games. So, like, just if you could briefly say about like how the games got funded. So you talked a little bit about Sunsoft, right? And that the origin of Myst is in trying to pitch Sunsoft. They wanted a more a bigger and more mature version of the kind of stuff you were doing. And was funding a big influence on the project? And then once it was a hit, how did that impact you and your studio and everything else? If you could just touch on that. That topic.
Long question here.
Yeah.
Money's key, and the cool thing is when the money runs out, the game is done. I mean, it's pretty much. Hopefully, those coincide in a good way, but not necessarily.
Was this the biggest budget you guys had?
Yeah.
For a game?
Oh yeah. We kind of had bootstrapped our company. We started by spending our spare times on the manhole. Robin was going to school in Seattle, and I was in Texas, and we put it together and put it on 5 floppy disks and took it to some festival, and Activision said, we'll give you $20,000 for it. We were like, whoa, we're rich. And we didn't realize how much time it had taken us was, probably 3 times that amount of money, but it was like, no, that's like huge. But with that money, we used to, to do Osmo and Spelunks and whatever. And then Sunsoft came to us and said, well, how much do you need? So being the geniuses we were with our 7-page proposal, we were like, well, a few people and some Macs to do it and some software. And we came up with a figure, I think that was around 100,000. And we said, well, we should double this. Let's say 200. No, let's put extra in there. Let's tell them 270. And we felt like, oh, man, we got to be careful. We're ripping them off. So
sounds like a big budget to me.
Don't ask. Yeah, it was. Long story short, it took about double that amount. So whatever your budget is, just double it and then double it again and double it again, and you'll still get it wrong because when the money runs out, the game is done. Pretty much. So we ended up. We don't want to get into publisher stuff here, but we had a publisher go belly up on us, and that'll happen too, probably. Just stop paying you for some strange reason. We never got any money from Cosmic Osmo, which is one of our favorite games, and never saw a penny from it.
Wow.
But that was Activision. Yeah. Fond memories of that time period. I was living with my parents, moved back in with my parents, So, long story short, the fact that we got the rights back, we then turned around. All we asked for was the rights back, and they took it to the courthouse steps. But we got the rights back, sold bundling rights to somebody who was putting CD-ROMs out, got another $250,000 that we then basically paid the other half of what it took to do Myst up ourselves, because we didn't realize you could go back to the people who gave you money and ask for more. It's like, no, we told them we'd do it for them. We better find money somewhere else.
Yeah. And then when the game came out and started to like make money, was that a transformative thing for the studio? And
Hell yeah.
Yeah, okay. And
that's when it became a studio.
Yeah.
Up till that point, it was just a couple guys working. You know,
Yeah.
That was a very bizarre time.
Are we talking limousines and helicopters?
No.
And strippers,
I
or
mean,
what's
we were still pretty modest. Never. There were the yachts and the women and but other than that, it was very modest. No. Truly, listen, I was living at the time in a double-wide mobile home. Okay, so, and there was no reason. It was a nice double-wide mobile home. Okay, so, but we didn't go extravagant. We paid ourselves pretty minimal salaries, and we just kept doing what we had done before, which is, well, if you make a lot of money, you put it back into the company, and so that's basically the money went into funding Riven. We did build a building that we could, have a nice space to make Riven in.
Yeah.
But that's why Riven was as good as it was, because
Right.
it had a lot bigger budget.
What about you guys? What was it like financially for you at the time? And then was there a transition? Or was Doom a big hit enough to like?
So
Wolfenstein 3D was already a successful game. You guys had some successes.
So we bootstrapped the company as well. If you want to be an indie, make games at home. Just do it. Don't just make your own game and try and get it out there some way. That's basically what we did. We were working at night while making games during the day. We're making games at night, and so the first trilogy of games that we made was the Commander Keen series. And because we were making games at night at the company that we worked at during the day, we had to do something for them so they wouldn't sue us. Because we wanted to own the Commander Keen IP, and we didn't want them to take us to court and take it away because we did it on their machines or any of that stuff. So after making Keen, we started making money. Our first check that came in basically was $10,500, and there's four of us that made. There really was three of us that made the Commander Keen series, the very first one, but there was four of us kind of in the team. And so after that first check came, we're like, we can all quit now. This is the beginning of like us making some good money with our game, and we can start making new ones. So what we did was we made a deal with the company that we were working at to make games for them for 1 year. And we'll do it one every 2 months, and we'll get $5,000 for that, and they won't sue us. And we'll own Commander Keen. So 1991, which February 1st of 91 was the day that we founded legally id Software, even though we'd made Commander Keen and put our id Software in the credits. We actually left Softdisk and started on our own. And we basically were getting monthly checks from Apogee, who was our publisher, and that was enough for us to actually live on, because the $5,000 was still actually, funny enough, that was actually enough money for the four of us, because the way that we kind of split up the money at the beginning was who needed what money to live. So I needed less than Tom needed, and Carmack needed less than everybody, and so we basically just like, whatever you need, that's what we're gonna pay ourselves, and leave the money in the bank and keep the money in the bank, because we don't know if the money's gonna run out. If people stop buying Commander Keen, then what do we do? So we just saved as much as possible, only paid the bills we had to pay, and during 1991, the whole year of 91, we're making games for someone else for $5,000 every 2 months. So that wasn't that much, right? It's like $30,000 a year for the year, just from Softdisk. But we made lots more money off of Commander Keen, and we were saving that money. And then we made another trilogy for ourselves. Well, there were 3 Commander Keen games. There's like a dual set, like a 2 games, and then 1 game that went commercial. Then we started working on Wolfenstein. So now we got 2 games out, and we're getting money now from 2 games. Then Wolfenstein comes out, and that's where really big numbers hit. And the smartest thing about Wolfenstein was the pricing structure of Wolfenstein was $35 for the trilogy, $15 for basically that amount of content again. So three episodes for $35 in the game, $15 for 3 more episodes of the game, and then $10 for the hint manual that tells you everything about it. And everybody bought all of it. It was extremely rare for anyone to not buy the whole $60 package. So everyone spent $60. And this is pure $60. This isn't retail where half of it's gone or anything. That's $60 where we got half and Apogee got half. And the first month, I think we sold like 4,000 copies the month that it was out. And so we're like $250,000 the first month, and Keen, and both Keens. And so we just started stacking money at that time to where we were making before Wolfenstein even came out, we were making about $50,000 a month. The company was bringing in $50 a month, and then Wolfenstein comes out, and it basically it starts at $300 a month and just goes up from there. Okay. And we had very conservative salaries, so we were whatever it takes at the beginning.
So by the time you were working on Doom, it was already engine was going.
Yeah, we'd already had so we were funding everything, keep the money in the bank, but by the time Wolfenstein came out, we were making $45,000 a year, or each of us was at $45,000 a year. There was only 6 of us. And then by the time, like even
we
within
were at 40,
year,
by the way. You guys were
at 40.
Yeah, we were all at 40. You were making more than us.
A few months after Wolfenstein, we went to 60 because the numbers were just getting way too big. We're like, we have to spend this money. You're a company, you have to spend it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're going to eat all of it in taxes. So you have to spend your money. Yeah. So basically, we then went to 60, and then by the time that we started working on Doom, it was 100, and so everybody got 100K. Like that was the flat, and basically until this day, they're still at 100K, like everybody.
Nice.
And it doesn't matter what you do, and so so it was easy to easy to calculate Doom's cost because every person in the company got 100K, so it was probably $800,000 to make that game. Yeah. Nice. And so then the money went insane, and and the game sold insane amounts. We bought awesome cars. We were renting houses. We didn't buy houses yet because we didn't care that much. But we cared about the cool cars and the clothes and stuff like that.
Did you get extravagant at all, Rand? Did you buy a car? Did you buy anything fancy when
I bought a Ford F-150? Right. The first new car I ever owned.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't have it anymore.
Were you back in the day? Let me ask you a question. Were you guys aware of each other back in the day? Did you know of each other's work? Did you know what was going on with MYST?
So back in I don't know if you were keeping track of this, but back then the Usenet was like that was where you read news, was on Usenet. Mm-hmm. And on Usenet they had the top 100 games every week. And so after MYST came out, we saw it like jumping all the way to the top, and we're like, what? They knocked Wolfenstein down. But we did every week. It was just like that's the list to be on.
So did you play it?
I actually didn't play MYST. It was the opposite of what we were doing, and we're spending all of our time in our game. And actually, by the time we released Doom, we were sick of playing Doom. That's how much we played it. We don't want to look at this game again. We're just disgusted. But yeah, every week it was just like, what is going on with this game? And then we basically checked out what it was all about. We're like, it's an adventure game. What? We didn't know, like, it's CD-ROM, it's like high res, it's mass market, and that wins. Yeah. And so we were just like, this is the anti-Doom. So we were like,
no demons.
I know, no demons. We have to crush this game,
Were you guys aware of Doom? Was that on your radar?
Oh yeah. In fact, I still remember. It took a long time to do MYST, and all the hours you put in. And at the end of it, I took a trip to New Mexico, and my fun in New Mexico was on my friend's PC playing Doom. So it was like it was the same thing, like get away from what I was working on. Yeah. And I was thinking, what is this? How it's like demons on Mars? Like what? What? I'm thinking like the opposite. It's like, why would people want to play this? But I couldn't stop. Kind of like, well, one more time.
Yeah. Let me ask a couple more questions, then we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience. But I want to ask about there's an interesting thing that both games share, which is a kind of strange. There's a bit of a spirituality in both games, right? So in in Doom, there's this idea of confronting hell and these demons. And in Myst, there's a kind of allegorical quality of this father and these sons and the confrontation there. I guess my question is like, were these conscious? So in the case of Myst, was there an aspect of I don't know if you're a religious person, but was there any kind of conscious expression of some of these deeper ideas through the game?
I think it's more subconscious. So I think honestly, I just talked about this. It feels like to me like the whole interactive development is still in some kind of infancy or adolescence or something. It just feels like we're still figuring this out. It's this incredibly powerful thing, and we still call it a game, and we kind of get laughed at and chuckled by by Hollywood. But it's like no, this is really powerful stuff. This is incredibly powerful, and we're still learning how to use it and how to evoke emotions and how to build a little bit of truth into this or make it into something that we'd call art. And just because we're learning doesn't mean you trivialize it. And so I think, I don't know about John, but in our case, we were like, well, we should, we can put some stuff in here in the story that's kind of interesting, and maybe we'll make people think about themselves or the world around them, and it was fairly trivial. I mean, it's not deep, but you're trying. It always feels like to me like the stages of becoming an artist involve this one stage where you're just a craftsman, where you're more like you're making furniture, but you're getting good enough at it that you think, I could do a little bit more in this, and that's where you're starting to think about the art form of it. And I mean, maybe it's the same for John, but that's what it felt like. It's like, well, I'll think a little bit about this and see what we can put in here. And I get excited. I still feel like we're in the early stages, and we've got like this incredible future, and I like that. It frustrated my brother a bit. A little side note, but
really?
At the end of Riven, he was like, I need to tell stories, and giving someone the option to turn away in the middle of when I'm trying to tell them something is frustrating. I want to go to more linear medium, and I'm still inspired by what can be done interactively. I really like that.
Right. John, I remember reading an article about a Zen Buddhist who played Doom and recognized in Doom a kind of similarity to some of the meditative practice that they had, where they actually kind of like meditate on kind of conjuring up demons and then killing them, like as part of this kind of like religious practice. And he was playing Doom and talking about how similar it was to that. And I guess I'm curious about whether, like, were there, because there is darkness in that game, and did that come from a dark place in you? Were you confronting demons at that time, or was it just all, fun, good time, over the top,
It was fun, good time, over the top.
So there wasn't any.
Well, the funny thing is, like, John Carmack and I both have backgrounds when we were growing up that were like, like poor kid. Bad things happening to poor kid, right? Like John went to juvenile hall for a year after he used thermite to steal computers. Wow. Like I got in lots of trouble because I was playing arcade games, and I got like mental abuse and some physical abuse, and so we were just like angry guys, and like now we can unleash that. And demons from the D&D game, like we're like. So everyone at id was an atheist. We did not believe in any religion at all. So when we came up with the idea of demons, it was just like D&D stuff, and then we're like, well, we're going to put demons in. We have to put in all the symbology of demons like we did with the Nazi stuff. So we're going to put pentagrams and dudes ripped in half, and everything that you would visualize demons doing, and everything that plays on the whole religious angle. And we felt nothing from putting it in there other than this will be great. Like someone's gonna hate pentagrams, and this room will be awful for them. And so just like pieces of meat everywhere, and just we did everything that would like this is hell. If you believe in it, maybe this is what it's like, And so we thought it was fun, and it was over the top. But there's like Masters of Doom. If you read the book, there's a lot of just like looking at like what were they channeling from their childhoods and all that. And I'm sure you could read all kinds of things like the Buddhist guy did. People have taken Doom and made the demons be actually like process numbers where you could kill the process by shooting the demon in the game. And lots of people have interpreted Doom in lots of different ways. But when we're making it, we're just like blow it all up. Nice. We were not thinking about we need to like make the player think before this happens. So
Right.
it's like, no, nonstop. We can't stop any death. It needs to be as fast as possible. But yeah, that was, and also the other industries laughing at the game industry, the music and the film industries.
Yeah.
The numbers for 2013 were like 11 billion is how much the music industry took in. I think 16 for the movie industry and 68 for the game industry.
Wow.
And in
Yeah.
2012, sorry, in 2013 the game industry went up to like 73
Wow.
billion.
Wow.
So the other industries aren't even close.
I want to ask a little bit about what you're doing now. So you were a rebellious juvenile delinquent. You are now an authority figure. Along with Brenda, you guys are leading up the game design program at UC Santa Cruz, right?
Yes.
So what's it like now to be in a position of authority, to now have people looking up to you and you're kind of making the rules?
Well, so I've owned 10 companies so far, so I'm kind of used to owning a company and running teams and running projects and stuff. So it's not weird for me. It's just like, okay, now they're students instead of actual game developers that have made several games. But we run the master's program at Santa Cruz, and it's a games and playable media master's degree, and it's a 1-year degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so my wife is the program director. She's been in the game industry since 1981. She worked on the entire Wizardry series, and she's pretty well known. And I've kind of intersected learning many times in the past, where I taught at UTD for a little bit, and then I started the Guild Hall, which is a competitive degree program, and
I didn't realize that you had sort of were one of the people that started the Guild
that
Hall.
was my idea.
That was your idea.
My
Okay,
idea.
wow,
I was
that's
teaching
cool.
at UTD, and I was
Wow.
like, I don't want to do a degree program at UTD because they asked me to do that, and I was like, I need a Full Sail in Dallas.
Right.
And so I
Very cool.
basically worked with one of the guy who got me to UTD. I worked with him to find out how can we fund it. So we found SMU.
Yeah.
And we found a think tank at SMU that was interested in, like, they needed a mission, and this was the perfect mission for them. And so Peter basically took that as his torch and ran with it. And so then we found the space. We found the space that we were going to put the Guild Hall in, and had it built out and developed. And I brought all the people that were going to determine the curriculum and all that stuff. And so we set the course. And for me, I was like, at the very beginning, this has to have level design as a degree. Not, art and programming, of course you're going to do that, but level design is its own deep discipline. It needs a degree as well. So that's why it's one of the few out there that has a degree in this.
Nice.
And then I had an MMO company from 2005 to 2010, and I was making an MMO for 4 years, and that MMO was an educational MMO to teach kids math in a stealth way through learning design, is what we called our special team of people from Lego Mindstorms and Leapfrog and all these other places where they teach kids in different different visual interactive ways. How do we do that inside of an MMO? And so we spent 4 years developing really great interactions to develop math curriculum for kids that would not know that they're being taught math because they're just puzzles and there's no number typing or anything.
Right.
And it's fully voluntary. So I've been involved in teaching stuff for a while.
Yeah.
So this was just
This
like
is not such a new role for you.
not such a new role. Yeah.
Yeah. And Rand, talk a little bit about the Kickstarter project that you had a successful Kickstarter for Abduction.
First, I got to say, John, you're becoming the man, and I'm gonna shave my head, get an earring, and put demons in my next game. You're gonna make an adventure game next, man.
Right. Yeah.
Not gonna happen.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. What was that process like? What was the Kickstarter like, and how's it going on Abduction? Where are you at now?
It was really cool.
Yeah.
And part of it has to do with the industry has gotten big, as we all know, and publishers get a lot of control and a lot of money, and it seemed like the longer we were in the industry, the more control and the more money they got. It's a really weird thing, but it's that way. Record companies get a lot, and Hollywood gets a lot, and the creatives don't get much. Like, even with MYST, it was 90%. We get like 10%, I think, or something like that. It's just how it was.
Wow.
So, and that was, bootstrapped company even. So we managed to eke that up a little, but it's still in a very low amount. So anyway, Kickstarter comes along, and mobile platforms come along, and all of it is really enabling for creative experimentation, because you can it gets back to a guy or two guys in a garage, and you have a voice or a way to go to market again with mobile and with Kickstarter, with Steam. I mean, there's a lot of really cool enabling ways to be creative again. So anyway, Kickstarter was our way. Finally, after a lot of years, a lot of people telling us to do a Kickstarter for a long time, and we didn't want to go do it without considering and doing right, picking the right project, and so that's what we did, this abduction thing, which is it felt like the right time and place. So we did it and got raised a 1.3. So that's not a lot of money, but it feels like the early days. We've got a very small team, and I love it. I mean, the small team thing is so cool, and it seems so efficient, and everybody's so excited, and nobody's working on one claw of the demon or whatever. Everybody's got to really have a feel for the whole game. I mean, everybody's engaged because you can't afford for somebody to lose track. It's a really incredible way to do things.
Fantastic. Let's open it up to the audience and see if there are any questions that you guys have. So I think we have a mic. Do we have a mic? Is there someone that can pass the mic around? They'll use mine. You guys keep yours and here. Let me here. Why don't you
go down there? I have a question for John. You mentioned level design, and I was wondering, do you think that modern games have kind of like lost that sense of, when you play things like Call of Duty and stuff? I mean, they're obviously based on really realistic environments. Do you think that games are kind of like missing that abstraction from Doom and Quake? And
I think everybody knows this. There's the famous graphic of here's the Doom level, and from 1993, and here's the 2013 level that's just a hallway with really cool cutscenes. One of the problems in making games nowadays is they need to FPSs, they kind of need to put you on a track through a level so you'll get through it, but also you'll experience really cool stuff. And the cooler that you build your level, that where players could explore it and go out there, the more QA you're going to spend and the more development time to fix the problems that are in those areas. And the easiest way to just stop that is by collision brushing your whole level, basically, so you can just see the cool stuff, but your focus is on the turret off the building as you're like going down an alleyway or something. The exploration in FPS is the exploration of levels has gone down on the major franchises, but in games like World of Warcraft, which just isn't an FPS but is an unbelievable game, there's full exploration in that game. You can go anywhere and just try and do anything to get over a mountain, in Skyrim, etc. So there's still really great exploration in games out there, just not the major franchises that are about kind of telling the story and really the original Call of Duty is the one that set the kind of template for future FPSs, where go do an objective. When the objective is over, you move on to the next objective. Like FPSs were kind of free form before that point, and more about exploration versus this linear thing. But the linear thing is people will do that, but they also know that on the numbers on those games are really on multiplayer. That's where people are playing Call of Duty and stuff. They're playing multiplayer, which lets you just run around the whole level and just destroy stuff. So I do understand that, but I think that there's still a lot of games that offer free exploration. I don't think that it's pigeonholed so badly.
Thank you. And what was the name of the person who did the GDC talk? I'm sorry.
Matthias Warch, MATTIAS WORCH. He's been a level designer since Doom.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's a two-part question. What kind of technologies do you guys, so there's the Rift out right now, is there any other technologies that you guys want to see pushed, or is the Rift being pushed hard enough? And then the second thing is, like, out of new games that you guys are playing right now, I know there's a lot of really cool indie games that are coming out right now. Is there any developers or games that you guys really enjoy?
So, I'm not big on VR so much. basically because any peripheral that is not part of a computer system that you buy probably has 10% max market. So it's not going to be as widespread as just using a computer and a mouse and a keyboard kind of thing. You can make some really cool stuff, but I think that the best designs that are going to come out of the Oculus are going to be games made only for the Oculus that explore what VR could be, not ports of games that exist right now. Even though they have shown, they have demos of playing Doom even in the Oculus, makes you feel like you're really there, unlike anything you've ever seen. Like watching Doom on a screen is not like watching it in the Oculus. So the immersion is real and it's really impressive, but I think that the next level of games is going to have to be something that's focused on that. But I just don't see everybody at home putting on goggles and playing games. And I've helped develop third-party joysticks and stuff, and they just don't have the numbers there. So I can't see it being the next revolution the way that Facebook would like it to be. And what was the second question?
The things you're playing now.
Oh yeah, so FTL, absolutely love FTL. Unbelievable game. Played Hotline Miami for a bit, which was really cool and disturbing. And I'm actually got to see Mugenics. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's Edmund's new game, and I'm friends with Edmund because he lives right there in Santa Cruz where I live, and it's going to be bigger than Binding of Isaac. It's unbelievable. The game is so cool. I didn't know what it was about until I saw it the other night at his place. It's hilarious. It's so awesome.
Yeah. Rand, what about you in terms of you at all interested in VR and the Oculus? Is that something you'd like to play with?
Yeah, I'm kind of with John on it. It's a tricky. Well, how this works. It's cart before the horse, and it's just really tricky. And I don't know where it goes. I know that there's a large barrier there, putting goggles on your head, and it's really cool. And I got sick the first time I explored Mist Island in it, because we have real-time mist, and you put it on and turn it. It feels like I've been drinking. Slower than my movement. You can speed it up and do fun things, but it is interesting because we don't want to leave it behind either. I think John's right. It's the most successful things using the Rift are going to be things that are designed specifically for it, and at the same time, people are like, well, I don't know if we can afford to design specifically for it because the market's too small. So, at the same time, during our design now for Abduction, we're considering that people might play it using the Rift, and so we're kind of redoing interfaces considering that. We don't want to hamstring ourselves, but at the same time, it's that box. It's that technology box. It's like, well, if we don't do this, it will work better for the Rift. So we're trying to consider those things. And I hate games. I never play them. No. I've actually been trying to get caught up a little bit with some of the indie adventure stuff. I mean, it's what I do. So
I'm curious whether you've played. I mean, we talked a little bit about creating spaces that don't need puzzles.
Right.
And that's kind of there's been a breakthrough a little bit in that. So there have been games like Dear Esther, Proteus, Gone Home, Stanley Parable, which are more about these spaces of exploration. Have you played any of those?
I've looked at almost all of those, and it's real interesting. I mean, and I've got opinions on all those. I love the fact that people can try those things. Dear Esther is a really, really interesting experiment, because it's beautiful, but it doesn't feel like it's interactive. It feels like it's a merger of poetry and space, which is cool. I just don't know what it is.
I stopped playing it after probably 2 hours because I just there's no game here. Standing in the Parable was really crazy. Yeah. Maybe it was 1 hour.
Stanley Parable was really cool because it had. I mean, and we've toyed with a similar idea, but they, way back in some early designs of something else we were looking at. But the whole, it almost, the parallel universe almost kind of feel was really interesting, and it's kind of a seed thing for going further. I love that. Gone Home was interesting, although it felt like if we'd have done that, people going, "What is this?" It's like, okay, come on, we want the same standard here. But it was interesting in the emotions that started to draw you in, which I love, and all those things add to the mix. Like, okay, this is all. It all feels like something. And experiments that pull things a little further, in my end of things, on the adventure end of things.
Cool. Other questions? Let's go right here with the blue shirt. I know, make it as hard as possible for the my controller.
All right, so I've only been to the Pacific Northwest once, but when I was there, I turned to my friend, I'm like, MYST, right? He goes, yeah, MYST. So I guess my question was, clearly, where you physically lived influenced the game you made, and I don't know what your office was like to make it like that. But, yeah, so I guess that's my question. Was it a conscious decision for both of you to make a game that was kind of like where you lived, or did you think that just sort of happened, or did you want to make it nothing like that, or, you know?
Yeah, ours was nothing like where we lived. We lived in apartments.
I've been to Texas.
It was hell living in an apartment, but you know, it was yeah. We were trying to make something that no one had seen before.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because we get that all the time. My wife she says that every time we fly in. It's like, look, the trees, they're just like MYST. And the reason is because Robin was doing the trees and he looks out his window and sees that. But more importantly, he's got to texture them with something. So he goes out with his camera and takes a picture of the bark on the trees and wraps it, you know, you wrap it around them and it becomes the tree texture, you know. So it was convenient. It was right there. And yeah, for Riven, I think they flew to New Mexico because we had money to fly to New Mexico. So, you know, it looks like different. But yeah, it was there. That's, by the way, how we chose our actors as well for MYST.
I'm just seeing if there's any women with questions. Just want to make sure that, okay, so how about we pass it forward to Evan? Oh, you're pointing out. Okay, please, yeah. Can you bring the mic? I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to, yeah.
It's not a question about gender, but okay. I was wondering if you could just, what were the best parts of your games that never made it into your games, respectively, speaking of Doom and MYST?
Yeah. The best, were there anything great on the cutting room floor that you regret?
No. We had all the levels were in the game that we made. Actually, there were some levels that went into Doom 2. And we're like we created whole new levels for Doom 1 and kept some of the parts for Doom 2. But we basically took stuff out of the game to make it better. So we from Wolfenstein to Doom, some of the design evolutions was get rid of lives. That's an arcade holdover. When people die, why don't they just start the level over the same level? There's no RPG elements or anything like that. So why don't they just let them play so they can finish the game? And then there was score. Originally, when we made Doom, we had put all kinds of like demonic chests and daggers, and we're like, why would they leave this stuff around? This is stupid. You know, like demons aren't going to leave daggers around. I know, it's so stupid. So
it's so unrealistic.
I know, it's ridiculous. Demons don't do that. So demons need to be more realistic by not leaving this stuff around. So we just took that stuff out. It's just like, if we're gonna have real demons, they gotta just be demons and not like leaving, hey, here's a chest, you know. So we took score and we took out the objects that were demonic, you know, and then so we removed those things. And in Wolfenstein we kind of did the same. Like, we had you be able to like drag bodies around and rummage through chests and take stuff off dead bodies, and we're like, that stops me from killing. Why would I do that? You know. So we actually put it all in there, and then we removed it because it slowed me down. So yeah, with Doom it was just like, you know, change the FPS to be a little bit more likable, you know, like, and finishable, and keep people's focus on getting through the level and not like trying to find all the score items.
Yeah. So with MYST, there's two parts to that. The first is similar, although it was something we put in. We did end up putting in, but we weren't going to put any music in at all, because in real life there's no music playing around you unless you're in an elevator. You know, it just doesn't happen. So of course, if you're making a game that's supposed to feel like you're in a real place, you don't put music in. And the publisher actually said, you should try some music. And Robin was like, okay, we'll try some ambient. It's going to sound more like sound effects and music. And the early stuff sounded much more ambient. And as he got more and went further on, it became like, wow, this is cool. We can control the emotions a little bit with this. In fact, it was interesting in that dentist chair in the planetarium that's so ominous looking. He put an early piece in there that was really minor. And we sat behind people. They'd open the door, they'd look in there, and they'd turn around and not go in. It was like, dude, you got to put something a little more, trumpets and happy, or no one will go in there. So that's why it ended up in there. The second thing is the Maze Runner. I don't know if any of you hate that as much as everybody hates it. It's in the kind of the desert age, the Selenetic age. That was originally going to be a walk-through maze, and what brings it to mind that we didn't do that, we put the little the runner on there, is we were looking at Monument Valley this morning, and I looked at our early designs. A lot of that was very reminiscent. It was these little pathways and walks and stairs that were going to go over and under each other and have these little puzzles built into them and mazes built into them. I thought that would have been really interesting. The early work that Chuck did on that looked really cool, and Monument Valley reminded me of it. So, yeah.
But that didn't make it in.
No, it didn't make it in. No.
Okay, so I think we have time for a couple more questions. Let's go right here, and then we'll go to you. Okay. So, yes, again, trying to make it as hard as possible.
This one's for Rand. So writers love to write about writing, and filmmakers love to make movies about making movies. The central metaphor in Myst is about creating entire worlds with the stroke of a pen. Did you make Myst on some level as a game about making games?
Not that we realized at the time. No,
In a way that you realized later?
Well, to a certain extent, yes, and it was after we started going down the MMO route, because we created this whole civilization that could build worlds, and it was this weird feeling because we'd sit and do the MMO, by the way, that we were doing was Myst Online or Uru or whatever. The idea was, rather than playing a leveling game with thousands of your closest friends, you could kind of pick a few people and go and explore worlds that wouldn't end. We would keep building ages that would keep on a monthly, ironically tied to your subscription fee, show up. And but as we were developing the culture and the history to these people who were writing these ages, we kept stumbling and thinking to ourselves, like, this stuff is just like what we're doing. We're building ages, we're writing worlds, we started building in the civilization the maintainer, these people called the maintainers, who ended up being a QA department. They would be in the history of these writers of worlds, they would send in the maintainers first to make sure it was safe. And so it all started to have these weird parallels with what we were doing. So yeah, we didn't even realize it at the time, but it started turning in on itself, which is kind of weird. Yeah.
And yeah, right here, and then that's great. Yeah, that's fine. And then we'll finish with you. Okay, so right there, and then
Hi, John. Hi, Rand. So I have a question for both of you. So John, you mentioned that you are making decisions in Doom in a very design decision using a very natural way. And do you think this design process still work nowadays? And do you think the design aspect in game design ever changed in these 20 years? And what's the difference?
Do I think that Doom's design influenced current game design?
Yeah. And do you think the design aspect of game ever changed in these 20 years?
yes, the process of design a lot different now.
Well, the teams are a lot bigger now, unless you're indie. But I think that there is a difference. I worked at Midway for a little bit, and their design process and the development process for a console title was so different than anything I'd done for a PC title. And I think that I think that every company kind of comes up with a way that they want to develop their stuff that's a slightly different flavor. So if you do go work at a game company and then you go work at another one, you're not going to be doing things exactly the same way. And I've seen this a few times where, like, wow, okay, so they do that here, And it's just what works best sometimes for the technology. sometimes for the executives and what they want to see on a certain timeline, etc. Some places want to do vertical slices, which is totally different than organic development and just check-ins on a scrum, on a sprint basis. Totally different situation. Or indie teams that don't care and they're going to make their game for as long as it takes. So there's flavors that are completely different, and there's only some things that are kind of similar. I mean, technologies are so differentiated now that you probably won't be using the same tech at certain game companies unless you're making Facebook games.
Yeah, I mean, John knows this better than I do, but even it being at the same company for a long time, which is what I've been, the design varies based on the talent of your people and the number of people even. I mean, we've changed things dramatically just because we have a guy in a role that could do that. It's like, well, you should be part of this then, and we'll move this way and adjust things. And if you don't adjust things, it just doesn't make sense. So.
I can give one example. At id, we created Doom and Quake and Doom 2 and Heretic and Hexen on Next Step on the Next Step operating system for DOS. And you're not going to go somewhere else to do that. That was really unique. And other places have different ways of developing. The step for us going beyond Quake, the plan was to do something even crazier beyond Quake. We're planning on getting a Cray YMP supercomputer and get enough processor boards per member, which would have mouse, keyboard, and video inputs and outputs, for us to basically have each person developing within a supercomputer. And we would be in a shared memory space. And we're going to design the tools so we could have full shared development within a supercomputer. You're not going to find that anywhere else either. And the reason why we didn't do it is because SGI bought Cray while we're making Quake and the deal fell apart. But we had a deal to buy a YMP. So that's another weird thing that you could run into. You never know.
All right, so I think we have time for one last question. Yes, right there.
Hey, I was just wondering, at the start of when media turned to video games as the latest source of violence and a lot of school tragedies and shootings and things like that, I was wondering if it affected your overall morality of your companies or your outlook of video games, or your responsibility as game designers, releasing content to mass audiences.
So it didn't. When Columbine happened, I absolutely didn't answer the phone for a long time, and I usually don't really do interviews about violence caused by video games, which I don't believe in. I believe it's the way that the parent raises the kid and makes sure that the kid knows what's real and what isn't real, and that they're stable and they're mentally healthy. I don't think games make anyone do anything, just like comic books and Judas Priest and Ozzy don't make people do anything. And people are blaming games just like they blamed every medium that's come along in decades past. So it's just the latest whipping child, I suppose.
Yeah, games are really broad. So the way we're entertained with games is we put it into one category, but it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it. I mean, kids have picked up sticks and fired them each other for a long time. Doesn't mean you're going to kill somebody later on, but that's a particular kind of game. And we look at violence and what we do with kind of a story-rich element as the violence is kind of this thing we can use to drive home a point or make an effect. And I think I would hope that Hollywood thinks the same way, because I mean, I did an ethics talk, and you can show a bunch of violent video games, but then you bring up Schindler's List, and guy puts a bullet in a woman's head, and everybody gasps, and it's like, but why isn't that violent? Why is that okay? And the point is there's something deeper there. There's something that makes you remember that incident. That violence drives home a point that it's like, wow, okay, I need to take that with me. And the only issue I have with the violence is, and in particular the story-driven stuff, because I think it's easy to separate if you're just playing a shooter. But in story-driven stuff, if you use your violence a little frivolously, we may get a bit inoculated when it's useful to drive home a point. And so so you have to use more violence, to drive it home in your story kind of thing. So that seems like a little bit of a lost something there, but it's just two different kinds of entertainment there.
Yeah, one of the things we used to say when all this was blowing up was, wait a minute, didn't Hitler kill more people then Doom, and then you're killing Doom demons, not even people. And what games was he playing back then to make him do that? You know.
Presumably. Let's squeeze in one. Right?
That's a good one.
Let's squeeze in one last question so we don't end on Hitler. Yeah. You've got a great final question. Yeah, how about right here? Right here.
Pull out some more game history there.
When I was writing a book about which was a history of video games, one of the things that always interested me was the crunch time factor and the drama that went down during that time, just because maybe the mind can't handle those hours. So there's stories of Graham Devine during The Seventh Guest, and even Sam Hauser recently told me about making Grand Theft Auto 5 that he would dream about those three characters. So I just want to know if there's anything in particular that you two remember that particularly affected you during crunch time.
That's funny. I thought this was going to be talking about the ethics of crunch time. In fact, we actually hired Aaron Hoffman, the EA spouse, at Loot Drop for a while. But yeah, we were in crunch all the time. I mean, we just loved making games, and that's why we crunched. It didn't feel like crunch; it felt like the best thing ever, right? Making these games constantly, and so yeah, working that many hours, you're gonna dream about the games, and just like. When you're learning something at a really rapid pace, like you're learning assembly and you have processor manuals next to your bed and you're reading that, you're going to be dreaming of assembly language. And it's the same thing with games. You're thinking about your characters and your levels. You're running through levels in your head while you're while you're dreaming. But also, like as a coder, you're solving your bugs while you're sleeping. Like you'll wake up and you'll know the answer to a debugging problem that you had for a while, which is pretty cool that happens. But yeah, anything that you do a lot, you're going to be thinking about it while you're asleep. Just can't help it.
Yeah, crunch time is, in some ways, it's evil because it's. I mean, as a programmer, I can still do all-nighters, but I don't know how healthy it is for me. I mean, I get so involved in the problem that I lose track of time, and then the sun's coming up. And the older you get, the more you have other things in your life that you should balance that with, because you kind of lose the next day a little bit, or you're not quite as sharp the next day. And especially when you have your own company or you're employing people, you can't necessarily just tell them, no, you're going to work for 120 hours this week, because they have families and they have kids. And so it really is this balance thing. But like John said, so many times they want to. And so it's not a bad thing for employers sometimes just saying to go home. And I wonder if they're not a little bit fresher and a little bit better the next day if you don't do it. But it's tempting. Those all-nighters and getting stuff done when you're just in the flow, and it's an amazing feeling, but it's almost like drugs. It's like, no, just put it down, walk away,
Yeah, we've actually told people go home, but we've never told anybody you better work on the weekend or you better work late. Like that's the line you don't cross. You let them do it if they want to.
They knew.
I'll just work later if they can't work late.
I want to thank you both. It was an honor to speak with you. I think between these two games, they really did sketch out in many ways the kind of the territory that video games have been exploring ever since in this particular direction. And one of the things that's so exciting about the contemporary landscape is a kind of return in a way to these smaller teams that are a little bit more passion driven and vision driven. And I can only hope that we see more games that are like Myst and that are like Doom that are so ambitious that sketch out these potential futures for video games to explore. So thank you very much. Please join me in thanking these two gentlemen for coming.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you.